Welcome back to the channel, besties. Welcome to my May 2026 reading journal setup. I'm super excited, honestly, to just be posting 2 weeks in a row for the first time in like months. And I'm also really hyped because I got a package in from Grabie. So thank you to Grabie for sponsoring today's video. We're going to be unboxing this today and using this new stationery in our setup. So without further ado, let's unbox this package and see what's inside. I feel like this box is too big for my camera to really pick up. Okay, so there's 2 things in here. First is this cutout collage book of steampunk explorer themed stickers and ephemera, which is going to be perfect for today's setup. And then we have this box in here. Let's open and see what's inside. Oh, it's a set of markers. So this is Grabie's 60 set of dual toned brush tip markers. It says that this is a multi-surface pack, works on many different surfaces. So I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, that these are acrylic markers. Yes, okay, so it's an acrylic paint marker set of 60. There are so many colors here for us to work with, and they're dual toned. So usually whenever you have dual ended markers, it means that one end is a brush pen and one end is a fine nib or a chisel nib or something like that. But in this particular pack, it turns out that there's 2 different colors per pen, which is so cool. Not only does this mean that although there's technically 60 markers, we do have 120 different colors in this pack, which is such a great range, but it also means that you can do more with these particular markers. Like, for example, if you were to take just a small handful of these markers with you somewhere and travel away from your office to do some art, you'd have a wider range of colors without having to take double the amount of markers and pens in your stationery travel kit. Because they are dual-ended, I would definitely recommend laying these brush pens horizontally when you're storing them. If you keep them vertically, all the ink could go into one end, and then the other end wouldn't be as pigmented. So if you keep it resting flat and horizontal, it's probably ideal for keeping both tips very pigmented. But what's great with a case like this is if you just put all the markers back in the slots that they came in, you can slide it back into the case that it came with. And since there's actually a handle on this pack, you can travel with it. And you can also just store it horizontally, slide it into your desk drawer just like this to keep all the markers flat. Now, I definitely want to go in and swatch all of these, but before we do that, let's look at the collage book that we also got in this package. As much as I love a good set of new markers, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be super beneficial for our setup today because I love doing scrapbooky spreads in my reading journal. So this is a book of 200 plus pages of paper and sticker goodies, which, I mean, yeah, this is so thick. Okay, so just flipping through the first couple of pages, they seem to be things you can write on, but you can also rip out these pages because if you look super close in here, every one of these is perforated, and each page also has a different design front and back. So you have 2 options. You can either rip out the page and completely use one page in your own journal, or you can cut different sections off. That way you can use both sides of the paper potentially. So many different options here. So we start with a bunch of beautiful designs, all very steampunked themed. There's also a lot of butterfly, vintage, dark academia, library aesthetics in here. I did see on their website that they also have a bunch of other collage books with different aesthetics and art styles. So you could definitely find something that you're interested in. In this book, there are also, I think, cutouts. So they're not quite stickers, but instead they're different drawings that are partially perforated around that you can punch out and paste into your journal. We have envelopes, we have antique keys. These are all really, really cool. And yeah, some of these are stickers as well, which is awesome. Like this range of stamps here, which I really, really like. I can totally see myself using this in my bullet journal spreads, especially since there's such a good range of colors here. It's not just like browns and golds, but we have some colorful stamps as well. So it could match with a lot of different themes. There's clocks in here, there's antique chests. I mean, amidst the whole like steampunk vibe, there's honestly a lot of miniature aesthetics as well slotted into this book. Even here at the end, there's like botanicals and plants and things. Yeah, I think this would be really cool to base our spread off of this today and do something really maximal and scrapbooky in my journal. I'm super excited to use both this and the set of markers. So if you want to check out Grabie, I'll have a link in the description box below so you can go check these out and the other stationery that they have to offer. Grabie has so many types of ephemera, stickers, markers, pens. Honestly, any art supply that you're looking for to spice up your bullet journaling hobby can be found on their website. And if you want to use my code to get a little bit of money off of your purchase, I will have it here on the screen and in the description box below. So like I said, my favorite thing to do when I get a new pack of pens or markers is to immediately test them and swatch them. I want to see the range of colors and just kind of how they work. So since this was my first time ever using acrylic markers from Grabie, I grabbed my sketchbook and did a little bit of a pen test here on the side to see how thick or how thin the pens could get. And because they are brush nib, I did a little bit of calligraphy here. And I reminded myself what was so cool about acrylic markers is because it is paint and it dries almost immediately when you put it down. down, you can use light colors on top of dark colors, like I did with the little example in the top right corner here. You can see the light pink lines over the dark pink swoosh in the back very clearly. So if you ever want to do a really fun artwork in your bullet journal, using acrylic markers means that you don't have to necessarily go light to dark, which is super cool. So now I'm swatching everything in the swatch sheet that came with the pack of markers, which I always appreciate. And this is always so satisfying to watch in like 30 times speed, me like zooming through all these different colors. What really stood out to me is they have a really nice range of blues in here, specifically like really rich navy and royal blues. And then also if you're into a little dusty pink, vintagey brown aesthetic, there's also a lot of colors here in both their reds and browns side of the swatch sheet that could definitely fit that color palette as well, which is going to be very beneficial to us because since we're going to be making our reading journal and spread inspired by the scrapbooking book that we got, I definitely wanted to use a couple of these markers here that lean into that same color palette for us to use later in the spread. So now that we have the swatch sheet done, we can see all the colors here, including these two really bright metallic gold and silver in the bottom right corner. Overall, I'm super excited to grab these later, but first, let's jump into my reading journal and actually start working on my spreads. So as you know, if you've watched any of my reading journal videos from the past couple of months, I have a little bit of a system that I've been doing recently. So first, I'll do one spread that's almost like a monthly overview. It has my statistics, all of my data from my reading over the past month, which I usually track on Storygraph, non-sponsored, but I really do love their app. And then I also want to list all of the books that I read during the month and my thoughts on them, my star ratings, things like that. And then going into another page later, we're going to be kind of hyperfixating on my favorite books of the month and doing little individual collages for my 5-star reads. I feel like I mention this every single reading journal video, but I would be amiss if I didn't mention it again. But I actually do have a second YouTube channel called Sophie Jo, and I post reading content over there. So reading vlogs, recommendation videos, it's always linked in the description box. But one thing I like to do with my reading journals is I do reading wrap-ups on that channel every 3 months. So I'm gonna be talking about books over here that I haven't really wrapped up on that channel yet. However, if you do want to see more about my thoughts on every book that I'm talking about today, I do have reading vlogs for these books on that channel as well. So enough of the self-promo. I am going to be working on a scrapbooking page here using a bunch of different pictures and ripped out papers from the book that we got. Now, I was trying to find different types of ephemera from all throughout the book that kind of match the same color palette. We are leaning very heavily into beiges and browns today and that little vintagey vibe. But I feel like recently with my bullet journal, I've been doing very brightly colored themes. So it was about time that I went back to my roots and leaned into that aesthetic of steampunk, vintage, browns and beiges, which are my comfort colors. My thought process when scrapbooking is really just like messing around and seeing what works. I wish that I had a more defined thought process that I went through when making these spreads. But even when I make like bullet journaling spreads with artwork in them, like my monthly setups, I usually have the artwork sketched out previously and a plan for what I'm going to do before I start shooting. When I shoot my scrapbooking videos, however, it's really on the fly, like 100%. I rip these papers out randomly in the moment. I put them around my journal spread how I wanted to in the moment. I really make decisions live when the camera is rolling, and therefore it's hard for me to like explain specifically what my thought process is necessarily. So I'm just gonna let the footage roll and you can see what I'm doing here on screen and try to follow along with what my scrapbooking style is. And while we do that, I'm going to talk about the books that I read in May and my reading statistics. So I read 4 books in the month of May, which honestly is kind of a lower end for me. I usually read about 6 to 8 books every single month. At least that's been my cadence for the year so far. However, I did read 2,963 pages. So that is pretty up to par with my standard every single month recently, somewhere in the high 2,000s, low 3,000s. And I think the reason that I only read 4 books this month, but I hit such a high page count is because the books that I read were chonky. I was reading some bricks this month. I don't know the exact number, but I believe that the average page count for the books that I read in May were probably somewhere around 550, 600 pages. So I think it is definitely reasonable that I only got to 4. Not that I really need to justify my own reading, but you know what I mean. So I included those statistics, my book count, my page count, etc. in the left side of the spread, but on the right bottom end, we're going to have a bunch of pie graphs and bar graphs, which I totally got from Storygraph. Again, they just create those metrics for you, which is super helpful. 75% of the books that I read this month were over 500 pages, and one was just under $499. I really do think it was just under that. And then 33% of the books that I read this month were fantasy and 67% were romance. But that's almost double dipping because 2 of the books were fantasy romances, which is why it's like we have 6 books, although we really only have 4. And then I read 3 books on physical copies and 1 book digitally this month. As far as my star ratings with the bar graph at the bottom, oh my goodness, there is a loud car outside. Would you please shut up? I gave 2 books this month 5 stars, and then I had a 3.5 star and a 4 star. So my average rating this month was actually 4.38, which has to be my highest average star rating in a minute. Now, normally I would be ecstatic about this average rating because obviously 2 5-stars in a month when you've only read 4 books is insane. And I am still super happy with the books that I read this month. However, it wasn't really a surprise that my average rating was this high because the 2 books that I rated 5 stars were both rereads for me. In fact, I did a lot of rereading over the past couple of weeks surrounding May and during May, and that's why my rating was just so high, because I wouldn't reread a book that I, of course, didn't like. So I suppose without further ado, it's time for me to just let you know what I actually read this month and my thoughts on every single book. So basically, if you have followed me on my other channel, you know that in the middle of April, I decided that I wanted to do a reread of the Boys of Tommen or Binding 13 series. And so in this month, I was reading books 4 and 5, which are Redeeming 6 and Taming 7 in this series. And then halfway through continuing my reread I reread Redeeming 6, but I had never read Taming 7 before. When I first read this series, I only got 4 books in, so book 5, Taming 7, was new to me. However, in the middle of going through that entire series process, my most anticipated book of the entire year came out in the middle of May, and that book is The Ballad of Falling Dragons, which is the sequel to When the Moon Hatched, which I read a couple of years ago. I think it was December of 2024. So in preparation for my new release to come out, which I was super excited for, I originally wasn't planning on doing a reread of When the Moon Hatched, but then I was getting closer and closer to the date, and I realized that I'd actually forgotten quite a lot of the minute details in book 1, which makes sense. I mean, it was a 600+ page book that I read 18 months ago. I probably have read over 100 books since then, so I figured it was probably smart for me to do a reread of that book as well. In order, I reread Redeeming 6, then I reread and annotated When the Moon Hatched, and then I read Ballad of Falling Dragons, and then I got back to Binding 13 and read Taming 7. So a little confusing, jumping back and forth between rereads and new to me reads, jumping back and forth between series this month. I will say that as a whole, although I had a great time with my reads in May, I am very excited now that I'm in June and have finished both of these series to be moving on to newer books and other types of stories, because as much as I really would love to be the kind of person that reads books, or I guess series in a row, and I really was that person for the past couple of weeks as I binged the Binding 13 series and I caught myself up on the When the Moon Hatched series, it is difficult for me to stay in one world or with one writing style for such a long time. And so I think that giving myself breaks or genre breaks or being able to switch out the type of book that I'm reading is beneficial for my own mental sanity as I'm reading. So all that to say, I'm super excited to do some more genres and types of books in June, but we're still talking about May, so let me not get too far ahead of myself. Let me give you a quick recap on the thoughts on all of these books and what I rated them. So first, Redeeming 6. This was a 100% 5-star book for me. Redeeming 6 is the 4th book in the series, but it is the 2nd book about Joey and Aoife, which is one of the couples in this interconnected standalone series, and they are my absolute favorite of all the characters. Joey is the older brother of the main character in books 1 and 2, and he particularly struggles with addiction because of his very, very tumultuous family life and home life, and he is my favorite character in the entire series, literally bar none. He is so complex and a bit tortured, and he has so many flaws to him, but deep down he really does have a heart of gold. And seeing him in this 2nd book with him and Aoife just go through all of their ups and downs, all of their trials and tribulations, specifically him working through his own mental health, his own addiction. It was just such a wonderful story. It is so emotional and so heartbreaking at times, and it really like brings tears to your eyes, but it was a 10 out of 10 reread, and I loved being able to just read their story again and immerse myself in the perfection that is Joey and Aoife together. So ride or die them. I love this book so much. 100% 5 stars. Then I reread When the Moon Hatched, as you well know. This is a fantasy romance book that honestly perfectly blends a really gorgeous romance story with really complex and beautiful fantasy. And I'm currently making a spread for it on the second page now for both this and The Ballad of Falling Dragons, because I just love the aesthetic behind this book. And When the Moon Hatched is like a god tier fantasy for me. Like, I absolutely love this story so much. So in book 1, we follow our main character, Rave, who is an assassin, and she is on this revenge plot to avenge someone that she knew. And in this world, there are dragons and moons, and when dragons die, they turn into moons and they go and solidify into the sky. It is a beautiful atmospheric fantasy world with elemental magic and different types of dragons and different kingdoms with different aesthetics and climates. And we follow Rave in this very intense story as we learn so many secrets about her, and she unveils more that she didn't know about herself. We meet one of the most underrated love interests of all time, Con Vager. I love him so much. He is so words of affirmation, like has always and will always be there, like yearning king. I love him, and their story is just so beautiful. So that reread was 100% necessary, and also it was so fun. I mean, okay, fun is not necessarily the word that I would use. It was emotional, okay? But that book is one that just hits 12 times harder on the reread because of what you know from the first time that you read it. And also, I was lucky enough to be able to read my friend's annotations because I had lent my book to my friend Ceci, and she had left her underlining and notes in the book as well. So it was super fun to be able to read through her little transcriptions and notes as I was rereading this book. So another 10 out of 10 experience, undoubtable 5-star, and I loved my reread of this book. So after that, I jumped directly into Ballad of Falling Dragons, which was the sequel, of course. This was such a great sequel. I really loved our, again, continued atmosphere, continued magic system, the characters, the world building, the development, everything was fantastic. The only thing that made me give this a 4-star and not a 5-star, which mind you is still a fantastic rating, but it didn't quite hit that level that book 1 was for me, is simply because I felt quite a bit confused in the middle section of this book. I feel like Sarah A. Parker's writing is so gorgeous and so detailed, but it left me feeling a little bit lost and a little bit just confused with where we were going in the middle section. However, I feel like if I ever went back and reread this book, which I think I might do some point next year when the paperback is hopefully released, then I will be able to understand it better and probably connect to it a lot more. And then the last book that I read this month was Taming 7. This is the 5th book, like I said, in Binding 13, and this follows Claire and Gibbsy, which is another couple in this interconnected standalone series. While I love their characters so much, they are like the golden retriever, class clown, like lighthearted, goofy characters, and they're so perfect for each other. This book really felt more like they were secondary characters in their own story, and I also felt like the trauma that we were introduced for specifically Gibbsy's character was not nearly delved into sufficient enough for my liking. Not that I want to see anyone in pain, of course, but I think that we brushed over his mental health issues way too quickly. So all that being said, as much as I love this series, this book is my least favorite of the series so far, but I still give it 3.5 stars, and I still definitely recommend Boys of Talmud as a whole. With that being said, we have finished our setup today. I hope you enjoy it, and make sure you check out Grabie with the link in the description box below and use my code here on the screen for a little bit of money off of your purchase. Thank you so much for watching. I love you so much, and I will see you very soon for a new video.